Our system of justice, from policing to courts to corrections, have failed many members of our Black community. A system that is supposed to keep you safe, but because of the color of your skin, you fear it. Today, I say enough. I want you to know I hear you, I see you, I believe you, and I am sorry.
Back to news here at home. Nova Scotia Premier, as you heard there, Stephen McNeil, spoke directly to Black and Indigenous residents of his province from Halifax today. He apologized for the systemic racism that those communities and other marginalized groups face in Nova Scotia and says his government will now look at restructuring the justice system to eliminate racism. Here's some local reaction to McNeil's speech.
I am so glad that someone is finally hearing us and acknowledging that this is a problem that needs to be addressed.
I think that in the wake of everything that's happened globally, to not think that there needs to be a shift in the way in which we do things, he's definitely taken the bull by the horns on that one and said, okay, we're going to reimagine that in Nova Scotia, and maybe this becomes the starting place and the model for what happens, nationally or internationally.
You want to apologize and we can get on with it? How can we? You've taken our society in the name of racism. Put it back.
And the Premier of Nova Scotia, Stephen McNeil, joins us now. He's in Halifax. Hi, Premier. Good to see you as always.
Nice to see you. I guess I don't see you. Nice to be on your show.
I wanted to start off with a very simple question, but the first one that jumped out to me, why now?
I think we've been working to deal with systemic issues inside of our government for the last 7 years. What we've seen globally when it comes to law enforcement and Black communities, and in our case Indigenous communities as well, in the more recent months has really made this the moment in time. When this was happening, we saw what was happening in the U.S. around George Floyd. We were seeing young people in our province, including my own children, who were saying enough is enough. It is time that our system was fair to everyone, that the justice system that has given us so much needs to be able to do the same thing for minorities in our province. And the groundswell of support from the public made this the right time to actually engage in this conversation about how can we reimagine justice in the province of Nova Scotia.
I certainly don't want to take away from the positive reaction, and I take your point. My producer, though, was able to look back on just how many, based actually on a comment your Justice Minister made today, essentially saying that there have been numerous reports done in the province looking at systemic racism. He was able to pull one from March of 2019, November of 2019, 1994, 1991, and 1990. Do you regret not doing something like this sooner? You have been in office since 2013.
Yeah, there's been ongoing work inside of government. There are many institutions, and government is one of them, that systemic racism is built in, and we've worked very hard to deal with the institutions that we are in charge of. But when we look at our relationship with our outside partners, particularly in the justice system, law enforcement, or the corrections, we need to dig deeper into why it is that some members of our community do not see this as a place of support or place of safety, but a place of fear. Why it is that a Black mother in our province has to give her children lessons about when you go into a store, keep your hands out of your pocket or you might be accused of stealing. Why is it that so many in our province do not see the benefit of the justice system? This is one of those where, quite honestly, I don't have an answer. I'm a white man who is privileged to be the Premier of this province. What we've put in place today is a process that we hear directly from those who've been marginalized, having police at the table, to have a conversation about how do we reimagine this, hearing each other's views, why it's important that we fully understand the impact of some of the decisions, whether it's street checks, surveillances that are having on our marginalized communities, on Black and Indigenous communities, and quite frankly, those who've been marginalized for other reasons. That's why this is so critical. And you listed reports that have provided us with a glimpse in, provided us with options that we begin to implement. Some of those changes are happening now. We banned street checks. But in order to change the system wholesomely, we need to go and ask those who are most impacted. I believe that's what's been missing. It is as those who've been impacted the most have not been at that table to send the direction on how do we change and reimagine and rediscover what justice looks like. At the same time, police need to be at that table. I think we need to ask ourselves some hard questions. Is who should be doing health checks on people who are at home? Should it be the police, or should we as government have a different approach to that? When it comes to a child coming into custody, should it be a police officer that goes and picks that child up, or should it be a social worker? So that that first interaction for a young person with a police officer isn't a negative one. Those are the kinds of things that we need to continue to evolve and then recognize and be upfront that there is systemic racism in institutions, and we need to call it out for what it is and then be willing to take action to address the challenges.
You mentioned, Premier, some of the improvements that your government has made. The one you referenced on street checks, for example. The author of that 2019 report, Scott Wardley, told our colleagues in Halifax just a few months ago that without proper monitoring to see if the street checks have fully stopped or how police are interacting with Black Nova Scotians at regular stops, it's hard to know for sure that there have been any improvements. So again, how does that, I'm not trying to take away from the improvements that have been made, but I think we're all kind of taking a hard look in the mirror and wondering if we have done enough. And though you've taken that action, for example, are you committed to making sure that you're actually, that those are having the effect that you want them to have, that it's having the desired effect? Will you be accountable in that respect?
That is the important part of making change, and that is the important part of having community at the table. They will hold you accountable. For far too long, a system has been changed without the mechanism of accountability. This restorative approach will hold government to account. We have made changes over the last number of years dealing with African Nova Scotians, Black Nova Scotians, and Indigenous Nova Scotians. There's processes in place to hold our government to account, but it's not enough. We need to acknowledge that there's systematic racism built into our institutions. We as a government, there are Black Nova Scotians for generations who've lived on land in this province who never had title. That still holds true today. We're working our way through to correct that historic injustice. We would take African Nova Scotian children into care and take them completely out of their community. Indigenous children into care, completely out of their community, not understanding their culture, not willing to listen to what community is saying. The important part of what we announced today is that community will be there alongside of government with an equal voice, alongside of law enforcement with an equal voice, to be able to tell law enforcement what it feels like to be a Black Nova Scotian and continually be monitored for your activity, what it is like to be a Black Nova Scotian to walk into a store and continue to be followed.
Sorry, go ahead, pardon me.
There was an interesting, I saw a powerful video of Dean Simmons, who's a Halifax Regional Police Officer, who was a Black Nova Scotian, talking about when he put on his uniform, he felt like he was putting on white privilege. That is a powerful statement that we need to listen to, that there are many people who do not feel that. And we need to make sure that the justice system responds to their needs and their desires, and quite honestly gives them the hope that I have for my children and grandchildren about their future. Black and Indigenous parents in this province deserve that same right, and the system does not allow that to happen. That's what this is about today. I believe we're gonna rediscover that the issues in justice, there's socioeconomic issues, there's housing issues, there's employment issues, all associated with this. But we need to start this conversation with community, with justice, and government at the table as equals, and everyone needs to show up with an open mind, an open heart, and we can solve this problem and move it forward.
On that subject, Premier, of how this will all take place, I do want to read to you and get your response to a tweet from Lindell Smith, whose name as a city councillor was attached to this press release. He thanked you for recognizing that the justice system had failed members of the Black and Indigenous communities and for apologizing. I did not agree, the tweet goes on to say, to having my name attached to this press release. I cannot support this initiative without discussing the terms of reference for the design committee, structure of that committee, and how the broader community organizations focused on community well-being for our Black and Indigenous communities will be included. We need to ensure that any process that looks at how systemic racism has affected Black and Indigenous communities provides clear outcomes in partnership with our communities. What happened there?
Well, that is exactly the point of the design committee, which we brought in community. It will be the design committee that lays out the terms of reference in the process. For far too long, it has been a white man like me, predominantly white men, sitting in seats of power, telling community, quite frankly, here's your solution, when we have no understanding of it. That's what the important part of the design committty is. It's
why was
law
Mr.
enforcement
Smith's
is at
name
that
included
committee.
on this then, if he didn't agree to that?
I obviously wasn't talking. I talked to Lindell at the first design committee meeting that he was at. He said he was all in. He looked forward to it. Who was talking about doing the press release? As you can appreciate, that's not all the things that I would do in the run of a day. But I want to tell you, Lindell is an important part of this conversation. So are so many other members of the community who were there today, adding their voice and, quite frankly, adding their hope that this is a moment in time that we need to step into, that we need to take charge of through community. I don't know the answer. I was very frank about that today. I don't have the solution. I'm a white privileged man who sits in a position of power. In order for me to find the right levers to solve these problems, I need to hear from community. But we also need to hear from law enforcement. We need to have them all at the table in the room at the same time, in order to find what is the right path that gives us all hope that here in Nova Scotia, we can finally deal with the issue of systemic racism and set a path forward for Canada and I believe beyond to deal with this issue that is all too prevalent in our societies. We need to acknowledge that.
I don't think anyone would disagree how significant and important the issues that you've laid out are. I have one final quick question for you, though, because you're not going to be around as leader of the party or premier. You've signaled that you're going to go, and once you've been replaced as leader of the party, then there will eventually be an election. What kind of commitment do you have from either your party or the opposition that this timeline, which is probably over 18 months, let's say, if not longer, if this is something that they will commit to as well? Because I'm sure your words resonate with a lot of people, but those people have also failed to see action in so many parts of this country, even after hearing those kinds of words.
So the opposition leaders were at the announcement today. I'm here for another 5 months. I'll continue to work with community to embed this process into community. That'll come back into government. No government, regardless of their political stripe, can honestly stand in front of you today and tell us our justice system or our systems are not racist. And if there's any government, whether it's in this province or beyond, that is willing to continue to turn a blind eye to that, I don't believe they'll be elected. That's whether they're a Liberal Party, Conservative Party, or Democrat. Our children will not let that happen. And that is the stark reality. The difference, though, that we've announced today is that we have reached into community and asked them for the solutions, as opposed the opposite way, which typically happens, government imposing on communities on the solutions they believe will work. This issue is centuries old. The process of government imposing a solution has never worked. This process is actually reaching out into community, those who have actually experienced the harm, to tell us what is a path forward, working with law enforcement, working with the entire justice system and governments to make sure that we are doing everything we can to include all of our citizens in the beauty of this province and the opportunities of this province.
Okay, Premier, I'll leave it there. I appreciate your time as always. Thanks so much for joining us. Nova Scotia Premier Stephen McNeil there. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.